This is the Inside Pitch with Peter Caliendo. Innovative thoughts from baseball's best coaching minds from around the world. Brought to you by Light Up Media Group. Now, your host, former USA Baseball National Team Coach, Peter Caliendo.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm your host, Peter Caliendo. First of all, I'd like to welcome and thank everyone around the world who's listening to our show. As you know, we like to get started right away. So that way we can get to the heart of our subject matter. So let's go ahead and begin with our very first guest. And our guest is Chris Johnson, known as Dr. Laugh. He retired after 38 years as an educator. Born in England, where he received his teaching degree. Then he came to Canada in 1971. He's taught from preschool to the university level. You know, what makes him special are like this type of comment. He says that his greatest thrill was teaching when he taught 3 years of kindergarten. He received a master's degree in education at Simon Fraser University, bachelor's degree in physical education from Canada from the College McGill University. He was the sports director of Sports Institute at Douglas College, a master's course conductor with the National Canadian Certification Program, where he trained over 10,000 coaches. He's developed the first 2-year coaching diploma in BC, British Columbia, and now that's a 4-year degree program. He developed the first fitness training program in BC. He has a $1.5 million fitness center at Douglas College named after him, the Chris Johnson Fitness Center. He frequently speaks to coaches, parents, and athletes about sport and its role in our lives, also presents on laughter and humor in the workplace at major conferences. Now, our topic for the evening is long-term development for kids in sports. Chris, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Peter. That must be the first time the introduction's taken longer than the presentation.
Well, you know what? I was debating that introduction, but I know you well, and I know that, you know what? You've done so much that people need to understand that once this interview is done and they listen to it, they know why you're so good at what you do. I've had the pleasure of working with you for 4 or 5 years now in BC. We've gone over and done some caravans where we work with parents, coaches, and players throughout the whole region. I know you don't like hearing it, but I consider you one of the best speakers, one of the best people that work with kids that I've ever been around. I've learned so much. You're so organized. You make people laugh. You're energetic. I mean, there's so much about you that, that a lot of coaches need to learn from, and not just learn, but they need to, take a lot of the principles, a lot of the theories that you have and put them into practice. And the first thing I'd like to start, because our audience has heard, obviously, Dr. Laugh. I'd like for you to enlighten our audience a little bit and tell us, I know, but tell the audience how you got the name Dr. Laugh.
Well, before I do that, Peter, I think I should remind you that Halloween finished last night, and I'm looking at you on Skype, so you can take your mask off anytime you like.
See, I knew we were going to laugh a lot, so you might as well.
No, actually, after I would put it back on if I were you. It looks much better with it on.
I might take Skype off. I might just shut it off.
Johnny Carson once said, if you want to get people listening, get them laughing. And I looked around me at instructors and presenters at conferences who sort of engaged the audience, and they used a lot of humor in their presentation. And at Douglas College, I became known as that strange English guy that used a lot of humor when he was presenting, and students used to come to my classes. And I finally put together a presentation called The Laughing Classroom, and I aimed it for faculty at the college on how to use more laughter and humor in their workshops, because there was some research to show that if you use cartoons and jokes and funny stories, it allows students to remember better what you were talking about, because it relates between the humor and the seriousness. Well, if you bore kids to death, then they ain't going to remember anything and they're not going to learn anything. So I did a presentation for faculty, and of course the only ones who came were the ones who already used humor. But after it was over, a woman came up and she said, my husband could do with a dose of your medicine, Dr. Laugh. And that's where the Dr. Laugh came from. And I said, oh, is he a teacher? She said, no, he's the manager of a bank in downtown Vancouver. So to cut a long story short, I went down and did a presentation on customer relations using laughter and humor. And then I got a phone call from the Bank of Montreal and a phone call from the Bank, Hong Kong, Singapore Bank. And next thing I knew, I was averaging about 60 presentations a year. So that's where the Dr. Laugh came from. But I've always sort of used laughter and humor and fun. I mean, that's the operative word when it comes to working with children. It's got to be fun, otherwise the kids don't come back. And in fact, the horrible statistics in Canada, 80% of kids drop out of sport by the age of 11. And the number one reason is because it ceases to be enjoyable. And I think the more fun we can put back into it, and I keep reminding you and I keep reminding everybody else that we're not coaching baseball, we're coaching kids. And there's a big difference. And if you want to teach kids at 5 and 6 years of age, you have to go to university for at least 5 years. If you want to coach kids at 5 and 6 years of age, you put your hand up at the wrong time in a meeting, or you go to the toilet. When you come back, somebody's giving you 15 rambunctious, nose-picking, bum-scratching little kids.
And you know what, Chris, that happens. That's also in the U.S., so that there's no difference there. But let me back up a second because, you know, a lot of coaches obviously need to show up to practice or need to show up to their events, you know, with that humor and smile and all that. And you do this all the time. You know, I was with you for 2 weeks straight. And, you know, everybody has bad days. How do you have that energy and the, you know, enthusiasm? What do you do to, in case, you know, you have a bad day? You know, if a lot of moms and dads, they go to work, they've had arguments, they could have been fired from work, and a lot of things could have happened in their lives. What do you do to make sure that, you know, you show up enthusiastic?
It's a great question. You never primed me on that one, but first of all, I love it. I get an adrenaline rush when I stand up in a classroom. I get an adrenaline rush when I stand up in front of a group of lawyers in Vegas or wherever I'm speaking. But I think you owe it to your audience. You owe it to the kids. They only get you once a week for an hour. And you have got to light their fire. You've got to set that spark going. And it's got nothing to do with baseball or soccer. It's got to do with an adult working with kids. I have grandchildren. And, you know, I play with the grandkids. I think kids are not playing with their parents anymore. I think some parents have this perception that the more baseball they play at 3, 4, and 5, the better baseball player they're going to be at 20, 25, 30. But I mean, you look at children, they play. It's spontaneous, it's creative. If you look at the definition of play in an encyclopedia, it's got nothing to do with baseball or soccer. It's got to do with mud pies, and it's got to do with making things out of paper, and it's got to do with inventing games. It's got to do with creativity and excitement and imagination. And you've all seen kids play with imaginary friends, and they've got fairies, and they've got it's this magic. Rachel Carson, if any of your listeners ever read a book, they should read the book called A Sense of Wonder by Rachel Carson. And she says every child is born with an inborn sense of wonder, and it is his misfortune that it is dimmed or dulled before we reach adulthood. And she says, if I could ask for a gift from the fairies at the christening of all children, it'd be a sense of wonder so indestructible it would last as long as life. I'm going quickly now. And it says, if a child is to keep alive this inborn sense of wonder without any such gift from the fairies, they need the companionship of one adult who can share the magic and the mystery of the world in which we live. And that's what I've tried to do in my teaching, whether it's maths or English or baseball or phys ed or soccer. It's an excitement. It's when a kid catches a ball for the very first time, perhaps he gets the same reaction inside that somebody gets when they slam dunk a ball 20 years later in basketball. We've got to excite them. We've got to get them turned on, if that's the right word. If you get kids turned on, they don't need to look for other kinds of stimulants like drugs and booze, and we can turn them on. And playing baseball, to me, is not necessarily one of the ways of turning them on, but whacking a ball with a tennis racket after a ballpark, even though it's not a baseball bat and a baseball, it gives them an excitement, it gives them an exhilaration, and then one day they'll be able to hit a baseball with a baseball bat, but we don't start them off at 4 years of age doing that.
Right. Now here's the thing I wanted to start with and talk about. You know, no different in Canada as I've traveled there with you, and or really anywhere in the world. A large percentage of the coaches that work with young kids, you know, these are young people. It could be, or these are moms and dads or volunteers. You know, they're well-intended people, but they have a huge responsibility on their shoulders, because they've got a lot of young kids that are going to be listening to them. You know, they're going to be running all these practices. You know, they lack they also lack the education. The things you're talking about. There's not a lot of education for coaches at the younger levels. So they're really, it's not their profession.
Let me interject there. There is in Canada. I mean, we have, you mentioned it earlier on, we have the National Coaching Certification Program. And the reason that came about was that we had coaches who were coaching kids with very little knowledge at all. In fact, a lot of them, because they played soccer in the old country, they assumed they could come over here and coach soccer in Canada, right? A lot of baseball players assumed they could. But the thing is, coaching, I don't believe we coach at the little level. We educate, we teach, we inspire, to use the example that I've used all the time, we teach them a vocabulary. What it is when my grandson learns to read, somebody, a preschool teacher or a daycare worker, starts working and they recognize squares and triangles and oblongs and circles. They start to recognize shapes. And then one day they start to recognize letters. And then another day, a few months later, they put the letters together. So they might put the letter D-O-G and they get dog. And then they put the words together and get sentences and paragraphs. And then they finally write a chapter and finally they can do a book. To me, the book is baseball. To me, the A's, B's, C's of baseball are the hand-eye coordination skills, the balance skills, the agility skills. That's what we do. We teach the letters first. We're trying to teach kids the whole flipping book before they've even learned the lessons. We're trying to, you see coaches out there with a regulation bat and a regulation ball, and the kids are choking up the bat because it's too long. They're not ready for that. They should be hitting balls with a tennis racket, or we build on success. We don't build on, I mean, you know, Pete, that baseball is one of the few sports where failure is good. You have a hitting average of 0.35, and that's very good. That means you miss 65% of the time.
Correct.
If you miss 65% of the time in a lot of sports, you wouldn't be playing that sport anymore.
Absolutely. Now, but in Canada, you have the certification program. Volunteers get the training. Here in the U.S., we have all kinds of organizations trying to develop coaches at the younger levels, but some of them don't really understand what you're talking about. They're trying to teach baseball instead of trying to teach the fun part of it and the skill part of it, or the development of their athlete.
Okay, well, in Canada, the National Coaching Certification, there's three components. The first component is the theory. It's the theory of coaching. It's to do with motivation. It's to do with, for example, one of the statements I'll never forget was the development of a positive self-concept is far more important than the acquisition of any particular skill. So what we do is we make the kids feel good by a variety of activities. If they feel good about themselves, they feel good about the coach, they feel good about the environment, they will learn. If they experience failure all the time, they don't feel good about themselves, especially when coaches make, you throw like a girl, or how many times have I told you not to do it that way, and all that kind of language that we see. So there is the theory component, and the theory talks about the psychology behind coaching. The technical component is purely sports specific. So if you want to be a soccer coach, you do level 1 theory, level 1 soccer technical. If you want to be a baseball coach, you've already done your level 1 theory, you do your level 1 baseball. And in fact, I think there's about 46 different sports now have their level 1, level 2, level 3. And in fact, in most jurisdictions now, you have to have level 1 before you can coach. You have to have a criminal search before you can coach. In order to represent Canada, you have to be fully certified at level 5. To go outside your province, you have to be certified at level 4. And if you're caught behind the bench and you're not certified, the organization is fined $1,000. And there is a commitment now to coaches. Most coaches don't have to pay. The organization pays for them to take the courses. But to me, I spent 4 years at university and I learned more in 14 hours on theory about children. And I knew it deep down, but we don't always practice what we preach. And it's when I used to walk in a gym and say, everybody touch 4 walls, and the last one I finished was 10 push-ups. I think it took the level 1 theory to say, hang on a minute, Chris, how is it the same little fat kid's always doing push-ups? And then how is it that little fat kid comes with a letter from his mom to say, can he be excused PE because he doesn't feel very well? Well, the reason he doesn't feel well is because he knows I'm going to embarrass him in front of his peers when I make him touch 4 walls and he's the last one. I see kids running cross-country runs around where I live, and I see the little fat kids at the end of the line puffing and panting, beet red, and everybody's waiting for them to finish. Well, don't send them on a 3-mile cross-country run. Put them on a soccer field, let them run for 5 minutes, and after 4.5 minutes, blow your whistle and say, right, you got 30 seconds to get back to me. Change the activity so they all feel valued and they all feel part of it. Not just, I mean, if another kid tells me he's playing dodgeball, I'll scream. I am sick and tired of kids in British Columbia playing dodgeball. Dodgeball. Because who's the one we always hit first? It's the shortest, fattest, slowest kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
You look when you choose teams, nobody ever chooses short, fat Freddy first. They always choose the most gifted athlete first.
Well, Chris, that's why we're doing the show. And that's why I thought this show is very important because, if they can hear you discuss this, if parents listen, if coaches that are volunteers listen, they're going to have a much better idea how to work with young kids. That's why I wanted to get into, and we're going to get into the heart of some of the things you do in the practice organizations and all that. One of the things I saw you do a lot, and when you were doing things with baseball with us, we were working skills. And one of the issues we had a lot was that in baseball, we start them off at 4, 5, 6 years old with a batting tee and a bat and a glove. And we expect them to, play catch. We expect them to hit with a regular bat. You saw all that. And then tell the audience what you told me, what we really should be doing to help these young kids develop those skills.
Okay, well, when I coached baseball many years ago just because my son was playing at 5 years of age, and I was horrified because all the kids were wearing mitts, gloves.
Yeah.
And I said, well, why? And they said, well, it's baseball. And that was the only reason they could give me, it was baseball. And I said, well, we play cricket in England, and I hate to mention cricket, Pete, because I know you hate the game, and so do I.
No. I actually have learned from cricket, believe it or not. You'd be surprised.
Well, we don't wear gloves for cricket. We teach the kids from day one how to catch a ball so it doesn't hurt them. And in fact, I was just watching the World Series the other night, and there's a couple of times where the catcher the guy fielding the ball has to turn his back on the ball to catch it with a reverse catch, and he loses contact with his eyes, where if he used no mitts at all, and I know the purists are all saying, but that's not baseball, you have to wear a mitt. But my argument was, when I'm teaching 4-year-old, 5-year-old kids to throw and catch, if you do it with no equipment at all, just get a Nerf ball or a softball and you throw it to the kids, they will try and catch it with 2 hands against their chest. Yeah. That is how they start off catching it. And then you say to them, okay, I don't want you to trap it against your chest. And what we do is we usually stand awfully close to them, and actually we throw it into their hands so they can catch it, because they still can't track it properly. So we actually throw it in their hands. So 9 times out of 10, it finishes at where I want. And I say to them, oh, great, well done. And
it's a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah. And then over a period of time, I throw the ball a little bit higher or whatever, and they have to catch, but they're still catching it with 2 hands. When they've learned to catch a ball with 2 hands, so here we get into this vocabulary. They've gone from A to B, and now C is, I say to them, I want you to try and catch this ball soft. Don't want a hard ball. Don't want it to hurt if they miss. I want you to catch it with 1 hand. 99.9% of them will try and catch it with their preferred hand. Mm-hmm. What do you do in baseball?
That's not your preferred hand.
You
with
put
your glove.
the mitt on their non-preferred hand. We haven't even taught them to catch it with 2 or the right, and you're telling them straight away, I'm going to screw you up. You've got to catch it with that non-preferred. And of course, 9 times out of 10, and then my next argument is, why do we wear a mitt? None of the kids hit the ball hard enough. Nobody throws it hard. I mean, we don't have mitts in rounders in England. We play with bare hands, and the game's very similar. It's just that we use 1 hand and a bat. But my problem is that people see themselves as coaching baseball. I'm trying to get away from that and say, we're teaching children. And if we can expose them to a wide variety, even if we have buckets with strings on and the kids throw a ball into a bucket, and I tell you what's good, those new things you have on your hand that it's got like Velcro on it, and when you throw the ball, it sticks on the pad. Well,
yeah, or can you use? I mean, you could use a sponge ball that's bigger, and they have no glove, where they have to catch the sponge ball with 2 hands. That's what they're going to use.
I use the wiffle balls, the ones with the holes in it.
Yep, and you also use the bean bags.
I use bean bags all the time, because bean bags, the kids make their own, so they've got their own bean bag. And also, what I'll say to them is, can you catch it on different parts of your body? Because one day, I don't know whether this kid is going to be a soccer player, and if he can catch the ball on his foot and cradle it before he shoots on net, that's a skill that he's learned. Actually, he learned it practicing baseball, but we didn't tell him it was baseball. He was practicing hand-eye coordination skills. But beanbags are excellent. The beauty is when you drop them on the floor, they don't roll all over the gym or all over. They're right there, so the kid picks it up and tosses it back. And the other thing,
I remember you had kids also moving and catching eventually.
Always moving. And the other thing is that when I throw a ball or when I throw an implement to a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old, the person receiving it has to give a target. because it gives you something to focus on. So when you're 5 years of age, I ask the kids to give a target, whether it's there. I mean, I used to play water polo, so I want the ball there because I can shoot. It's no use sending it on my left hand because I got to get it from there to there and then I shoot. So I always present this target. And when the kid puts it in the target, I say, good throw, thank you. Reinforce the positive.
And when they're 4 or 5 years old, and let's say, when can you start them at that age with beanbags playing catch together?
I start at 2.
Or is that or are they doing it with a coach or parent first?
Do it with the parents at home. And I give homework when I'm coaching, because the other thing is that the research shows that if you practice something 5 times a week for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, it's far superior to once a week for 25 minutes.
Well, that was going to be one of my other questions, and let's go to that since we're on it. One of my other questions was, if it takes that many days to develop these skills, athleticism for the kids, then parents are extremely important because they need to spend time with their kids. Their coaches don't have that time. Most kids or most coaches in the U.S., with young kids, they basically practice twice a week if they're lucky. So the parent is very important in understanding how to do this.
Well, what I do is, as a coach, I give out homework cards. On the card, it will say, go home, and after dinner one night, go in the garden and practice throwing and catching 20 times. Do roll a ball, get your father or mother to roll a ball, pick it up, throw it back to them 20 times. And when you've done the homework, the kid signs the card to say the parent's done it. So there's an emphasis on the bit of pressure. And there again, there's an old saying, I'm sure you've heard it, families that play together stay together. Yeah. We don't play with our children. I did with my kids, but I don't see a lot of parents out now. You can't even go and kick a soccer ball in most fields here because they're closed for practices only. We're even closing our facilities down. And I've always said, if you go down to the ballpark or a park to play baseball, if you put out a baseball bat and a ball, the kids wouldn't play baseball. If they've never seen it on television, they wouldn't play baseball. They'd most likely leave the bat on the floor and just throw catch.
Right.
Why would you play something that you can't enjoy?
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you gave them a whacking great bat and a whacking great ball, I mean, we had that game called Blast Ball. I don't know whether they have it in the States, but it was a lead-up game. The kids at 5 years of age, there's only one base, and when you jump on the base, it makes a noise like passing gas. Well, all the kids wanted to do was pass gas, so they used to run and jump up and down. And the thing was, got nothing to do with baseball, but they knew if they wanted to jump on that base, they had to hit the ball. So we gave them the big plastic bats that you buy at Walmart or Kmart. You've seen it.
And that's going to go. Go ahead, because that's going to go to our next topic. Talk about the bats also, because that's critical.
Well, we use the big bats, about the plastic, lightweight, and the big white ball.
And what's the benefit?
Well, the bigger the bat, the bigger the ball, the more success in hitting it.
Absolutely.
Donald Bradman was a world famous cricketer, and when he got into his late teens, he used to hit a golf ball with a cricket stump. Now, a cricket stump is 1 inch around, and the golf ball is 1.5 inches. He used to hit it, but he was 18. He didn't do that when he was 5. When he was 5, he used a tennis racket and a tennis ball because his chances of hitting it were greatly enhanced. So the more success a kid can experience, the more he'll want to stay in the sport. That's why in Holland, they've done away with goalkeepers in soccer. They said to the kids, what do you enjoy doing the most? They said, we enjoy scoring goals. So they said, how would get rid of the goalkeepers? So they have no goalkeepers at all now. And who wants to play goalkeeper in the middle of winter in February, standing there freezing your buns off, when you're 5 years of age?
Well, you know what? If we're talking about that, then let's discuss also, what do you think about keeping score? Some people keep score, some don't want to. Where's the benefit? Is there a better age to start at? I mean, kids know what the score is, or at least they ask all the time, who's winning.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's different ways of doing it. We set up a league once where at the end of the game, we added the scores together, and the 2 teams that got the most points at the end of the season won the league, right? So 1 week you were playing Team B and your Team A, and at the end of the game, the score was 6-5 in goals. Well, those 2 teams scored 11. And at the end of the year, the 2 teams. So what it was doing, the kids were allowing other kids to shoot on goal because it meant they got more points at the end of the game. So we took out most of the competition. But
eventually, there's got to be a certain age where you say, you know what, we got to start keeping score because that's what's going to happen as they get older. But I'm not sure what that age would be.
Well, when we talk later on, perhaps about this 5-year developmental difference, one of the problems is when a kid comes home from his very first soccer game, the first question his mum and dad say to him is what? Did you win?
How did it go? Or how was practice or game?
Did you win, usually?
Yeah.
And what was the score? Now, the kid hasn't a clue what the score was because he doesn't give a... Let me backtrack a minute. If you look into psychology books and look at age group characteristics, if you look at children of 5, 6 years of age, it says they enjoy games that involve chasing and being chased. Soccer is a game where you chase each other and chase a ball. They don't give a damn about scoring goals. All they want to do is chase each other. And if you've ever seen little kids play baseball or t-ball, when somebody hits a ball into the outfield, who chases it? Everybody chases it. And the coaches say, no, it's built into their genetic makeup that it's like a fox chasing a rabbit. They see a ball moving and they all run and dive on it, and the coaches...
Well, that's what makes baseball difficult.
Well, it is, but the point is, if you realize that that's what kids do, then gear the game to chasing and being chased. But the point I was going to make is, when the kid goes home and the parents say, did you win? He says, I haven't a clue. After 2 or 3 weeks, the kid says, hang on a minute. I better ask the coach if we won, because I know mum and dad are going to ask me.
They're going to ask me.
I mean, when I said to my son what was the best part about playing soccer, he said oranges at half time. It's got nothing to do with a game of soccer. It was oranges at half time. And kids' perceptions are different to parents. And if you have a parent who's very competitive, I'll guarantee they'll be out there practicing every night, but it won't be a fun thing, because the parent will be saying, how many times did I tell you, keep your eye on the ball? Well, that is a stupid statement. If you said to him, watch the ball into your hand, or watch the ball make contact with your foot, or watch the bat make contact with, but keep your eye on the ball means if you pitch over my head, I watch it go. You didn't say anything about hit it. You just said keep your eye on the ball. What a stupid statement.
And that goes back to how important it is to educate our volunteers, because of the fact that you do hear comments like throw strikes, and a kid is trying to throw strikes, or hit the ball or watch the ball, when they're trying to do those things, but the coaches don't understand that it's not about trying to watch the baseball. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, there is. And the other thing we do is that in some of my sessions, and you've seen it, when I ask the parents if they can walk on a 2x4, most parents can walk on a 2x4. But if I put it 50 feet in the air, none of them can walk on that 2x4. But the thing is, the skill is still the same. Now, the skill of hitting a ball, whether it's with a tennis racket or whatever, is exactly the same as hitting the ball. But if the parent's saying, now, if you miss this, you're in deep trouble, or how many times, what you do is you make them more anxious, more nervous. And of course, the research shows the more anxious you get, even some parents going to watch their children causes anxiety in their kids. So what we suggest to parents, when we do this coaching clinic, we ask the parents, we say to them, parents say to the kid, would you like me to come and watch you play today? And if the kid says no, then we respect it. And perhaps we'll go and stand in the bushes somewhere or sit in the car and watch. But some kids get really, I swam for England and I got really uptight when my dad was there.
I was the same way when my parents, and that's why my parents always stayed to the side or tried, to an area where I couldn't see them, because they didn't want to put that pressure on me.
It's called arousal producing.
But and it's interesting you talk about that, because the next question just happened to be, when do we start putting the pressure on youngsters so they start to deal with it?
I would say after puberty. I would say around teenage years. But then again, we talked very briefly about this 5-year developmental difference. You know that you can have a 14-year-old kid who's already growing a beard. And
Right.
you can also have a 14-year-old kid who has not even reached sexual maturity yet. So in fact, you can have a 14-year-old kid who was born 14 years ago who is physically 16. You can also have a 14-year-old kid who is physically 12. That's a 4-year developmental difference in it. And it stands to reason the 16-year-old kid is going to be bigger and stronger and faster and hit the ball further and throw harder than the 14-year-old. Right. And in some sports like hockey, where you're allowed body contact, the kid may drop out of the sport due to that bigger boy hitting him all the time. But the other research shows that if that late maturer stays in the sport, he will eventually catch up and take over the early maturer. And in fact, he may be a better performer. But the problem is he's not around because he lost faith when he was in those early years. He didn't feel good about playing it.
Right.
The more a kid can achieve success, the more he'll want to come back and do it.
And let's stay on that 5-year development plan, because I think that's important. That I know that's pretty much the heart of this talk. The young kids, what about when you have this 14-year-old who's got, who's growing hair, and you got another 14-year-old who's not? How do you group these kids into the practice? So do they stay on that team, or is it better to move some up, some down?
I personally I personally believe that people should perform at their level because if you're too good for a team, for example, I see it with young soccer players. There's one kid on the team who is brilliant and scores all the goals, and a lot of the kids become disheartened because they never score a goal. And then by the same token, you get kids who are late maturers who never score a goal. I believe that kids should play up according to their ability. They should play according to their physiological age, their skill age, not the fact that they were born in a certain year. And again, we have the same problem in the school system here. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but if you're born before December 31st, you go to school in September. If you're born after December 31st, you go to school the following September. Now, that 1 year, for those kids who were born December 30th and those kids born January 1st, that's a 1 year difference in school.
And that's why some parents have actually held kids back.
Some parents will tell them, I wish we'd have held it's nothing to do with me, but in hindsight, my daughter should have held my grandson back because physically, emotionally, socially, he was not ready to move up. He should have been held back. And again, we have that whole stigma of people who say, well, my children failed. They don't fail. The teachers believe that if they go up into the next grade, they will fall further behind than they are already. So it's better to let them stay behind. Now, what it means is that if you've got a kid playing baseball and halfway through the season he puts on a bit of a growth spurt and starts to hit, we should have the ability to be able to move him up a team. But most teams, once you've signed up for that team, you have to stay with that team for the whole season. You're not allowed to move at all.
Right. And I think it's good for young kids that are, that are more mature, they're developing. They're doing really good. I mean, they're almost dominating. Those kids need to fail a little bit. So if they go up to a higher level, they're going to see a little bit of failure because if they don't see it young enough, what happens when they get older? They've never failed, and all of a sudden now they're starting to fail.
Well, there's a psychologist in the States who made one woman once said to me, you should teach the kids to lose because they do a lot of it when they're growing up. And I never had an answer for that. And I forgot the guy's name. I think it was Skinner. But anyway, he said the first 5 years of a child's life, the first 10 years of a child's life are the most important years developmentally. He says what we have to do is make sure that a child experiences more successes than failures so he can more adequately handle the failures and disappointments of later years. He didn't say teach the kids to fail so they can handle failure. He said make sure we can surround them with lots of success so when they do move over that magic line, wherever it is, they can handle failure better. If we teach them to fail at an early age, a lot of kids won't even be around at puberty. They'll have long gone.
Interesting. So that's why we tell coaches, if you're going to explain something to a player, a lot of times, talk about a lot of positive things they're doing right, and then maybe explain one of the things they might be not doing as well.
Okay, the thing here with the principles of feedback, there's 4 principles of feedback. Well, the 3 main principles of feedback. When you're giving feedback to an athlete, number 1, you're a valued member of this team. That's number 1 as a person. Number 2, these are the things you're doing well. And number 3, here are some things we're going to work on to make it better. Not you are a lousy player, you're a jerk or dingbat, you're a lousy player. You're a valued member of the team. These are the things you're doing well. Here are some things we're going to work on to make it better. And then we have the principles of feedback. It should be specific, not general, all that sooner, not later. Check for clarity. Do you understand what I mean by keep your elbow up? Do you understand what I mean by high? That if you don't understand what I'm trying to say to you, because one of the hardest things about coaching is putting actions into words. And that is why I believe that every time a coach teaches a new skill, he should be able to demonstrate that skill as near perfectly as possible.
And Chris, I just want to stop you just for a second, only because I think you brought up a very important point right there. And that's one reason, as you know, when we do the caravan in Canada and also in the U.S., we take the coaches, put them on the field, and we make them do all the drills, and we teach them how the drill works. So that way, exactly, they can show it to a youngster when they're trying to explain it.
That's right, because some kids learn visually. Some kids learn by seeing, but one thing there that I tried and I've done quite successfully, and you've seen it, is that every kid on the practice ground has a parent working with him, or her.
And I love that.
But it's not their own parent.
Right.
Because I found that parents have much more empathy with somebody else's child than they do with their own. And the beauty is that while I'm explaining to them what a bunt is and how it's done, they will demonstrate to the kid, and then the kid will demonstrate to them. And in fact, the kid will give feedback to the adult, and the adult will give feedback to the kid. So that when they go home with their own parents, They know what we've been practicing and what the key teaching points are and so on. But again, they have to practice it 2 or 3 times after dinner or whenever, Saturday morning, even off season. I mean, things like the research now showing that if you have a shoulder injury, if you throw left-handed, the injury heals quicker. And also at the same time, when you're throwing left-handed, you have to think about it, because when you throw right-handed, you stop thinking about it, you just do it, right? But if you're doing it with your left hand, you have to think, where does my elbow go? So in fact, it reinforces all the teaching points that we don't use because we're just so used to throwing a ball.
All right, you brought it up, and it's not a question that I was going to ask, but I thought, it just popped in my head. I get questions sometimes, when a kid's 4 or 5 years old, and a mom and dad says, well, I don't know if he throws righty or lefty. Should I make him play catch left-handed? Because in baseball, left-handed is important. Or, what do you think when they're 4 or 5 years old?
Let them play both. I mean, there's a kid in the States somewhere that pitches 95 mile an hour or something, 93 miles with his right hand.
Yeah, both.
89 with his left hand. I mean, that's remarkable. If we could, and the sad part is, as soon as you put a mitt on a left hand, you basically tell a child for the rest of his life you're only going to throw right-handed.
Yeah, so you're saying just let them keep doing it both ways till they figure out, or till the body figures out which one is better or they like.
My 13-year-old grandson has still not decided whether he's playing golf right or left, so he has 2 sets of golf clubs.
Wow.
And one day he will decide, and that's the way he'll play.
Wow. Okay, that makes sense to me. I think that, if there's we have a lot of coaches all over the world that are listening. I know you have a coaching manual later on, just so you know, what's that?
You hope you've got lots of coaches. You may have one.
No, we're getting emails from all over the world. There's a lot of people that are really enjoying just from our first show a week ago. And I know after they listen to this, as long as they don't have to, they don't need a translator because of your English accent, I think we'll be okay.
It's interesting you talk about that, because if I remember correctly, I was watching some of the kids in China and Korea and Japan. Those kids work out phenomenal number of hours a day.
Well, I'll give you an example. We talk about it in the U.S., the Japanese. I was talking to some Japanese just recently, 12 and under, they only practice on weekends, but they practice for 7 to 8 hours a day, Saturday and Sunday. They don't practice at all during the week, and these kids are really, really good.
Well, they may not practice, but they may be doing something at home with the parents.
Yeah, and Japanese kids or Asian kids, they tend to do a lot of things on their own. Once you give them a project or something to do, they do it all the time on their own.
I also think, I hope I'm not stereotyping here, but I also think that Asian kids and parents have a better work ethic than we do in North America.
No, and you know what? You're not stereotyping, because statistics show also, even in the U.S., the average paid person in the U.S. are more Asian people than they are American people. And simply because a lot of it has to do with their work ethics, the way they were brought up.
I think we have to be careful. I mean, I remember somebody once saying that none of the major league pitchers ever pitched when they were little kids. They waited until, I've heard people say, give me a well-rounded athlete and we will turn them into a pitcher or a catcher or a hitter.
I think you hit it right on the button. We're specializing way too young. And I know there's a lot of coaches out there that are trying to not do that, because they're finding out, and the statistics are showing this, that kids who specialize early end up not playing the game after a while. Where if they're allowed to play many sports at a young age, later on they'll figure out that sport. And by the time they get to high school, we've had plenty of players that have been drafted that have not played when they were younger, but played only high school baseball.
Well, we have a Grant Connell here, played tennis, and he was a hockey player, and he was also a baseball player, and he could have done very, very well at both sports. And Grant Connell represented Canada in tennis. And I was presenting with him one day, and he said, do you know why I became a tennis player? And I said, no. He said, because my father joined the North Shore Winter Club. When he was 15, his father joined the North Shore Winter Club, which had indoor tennis courts, and he started to play tennis. He finished it within 2 years representing Canada. What he was he was a well-rounded athlete. He had all the attributes of being an athlete, not a tennis player, not a hockey player. He had all the little bits of the jigsaw that fitted together. And it's the same with Steve Nash. Steve Nash plays basketball, but I also understood he was a brilliant shortstop. His brother was captain of the Vancouver Whitecaps. I think it's a bit of genetics, and that's another topic we could talk about. If you want to be world champion, choose your parents well, because a lot of the research now says it's genetically linked. If you've got the genes, you look how many good hockey players, their sons are in the NHL. They have the genes. The parents put them into hockey. We got people putting kids in hockey, hoping they're going to play in the major NHL. They haven't got a hope in hell of playing in the NHL because their parents didn't give them any of the qualities they need to be a good hockey player.
Yeah, and you see it here. A lot of major league players, their sons are also, go on to play Major League Baseball. And here's what's interesting. We've got a lot more to talk about, but we're also going to bring you back on another show. That's what I love about your program is you're developing athletes. You're developing athletic skills. Now, that's the first part, but now it takes the coaches. And I know you have a coaching manual. We're going to actually put all the information, not the actual manual, but how to get the manual, how to contact you. It's going to be on our website. But for a second, let's talk about the coaches because, one of the issues we have in baseball, and it doesn't have to be related to baseball. It can be related to any sport, but practice organization. What are the maybe the common things you see that coaches just are not doing well enough when it comes to organize the practice for kids? And that's the reason kids drop out of sports is because they don't enjoy their practice.
Well, the reason I wrote my book is that I got the impression that a lot of coaches flew by the seat of the pants. When they arrived at a practice, they then started to think what they were going to do for the next hour. So when it came to, for example, warm-ups, I'm a great believer in the game of tag because the research now shows that if the warm-up sort of replicates the sport, it's a better thing than just standing there doing stretching. So we started playing tag. Now, if I can use the example, if you're a coach and you're going to play tag with your kids as a warm-up and you only know 2 games of tag, then that's it. If you don't sit down the day before or 2 days before and go to a library or go into the Google and Google tag games, oh, there's a neat one. I haven't seen that one before. So suddenly I've got 5 more tag games. At the end of the practice, I send the kids home and say, okay, kids, when you go home, I want you to talk to the parents and I want you to find out if they played a game of tag when they were kids and what it was, because next week I want you to come and share it with the rest of us. So we allow the kids to have input in your practice. And by that, I watch them. And I also pick up a new game of so I'm increasing my vocabulary. So I believe that when you start first, everybody should have a lesson plan. There are 4, I don't think you've ever heard this speech. There are 4 components to the lesson plan. Number 1 is the introductory activity or warm-up. Number 2 is the main theme of the lesson. What is it I'm going to teach today? And it's usually at the beginning when you're fresh and new. The third component is refining or modifying something you've already learned before. And then the 4th activity is your concluding activity, your cool down. It can be a game, it can be stretching. So those are the 4 components. About in an hour-long practice, about 5 or 6, 7 or 8 minutes for your warm-up, 20 minutes for the new theme, 15 minutes for the old theme, 10 minutes to cool down. And it's written down. And it's written down and you carry it on a card and you put the card in your sock or in your pocket and you pull it out and say, oh. So you should be just as well prepared. The thing I use is if you want your kids to be the best, if you want your athletes to be the best they can be, then you as a coach have a responsibility to be the very best that you can be. And you can't just draw on previous knowledge. You have to keep up to date with all the stuff that's going on in the research. You have to have a wide variety. Your book, for example, everybody should be reading your book and taking bits out of it, reading another book. Oh, I like that idea, and writing a lesson plan. And the beauty is at the end of the season, all those lesson plans get photocopied and the head coach keeps them. So when you get a new coach coming next year, he says, I don't know what the hell to do. You say, look, there's a book and it's got 120 lesson plans in. And the lesson plans are so precise that the thing I use is, the coach can drop dead. Somebody can rush out and pick his lesson plan up and teach as though they were the coach. That's how much detail you put into them.
And you know what? I remember 15, 20 years ago, soccer coming into the U.S. A lot of parents don't know anything about soccer. I didn't know anything about soccer that much. And what they did, they developed that plan that you just talked about. So that way, anybody that didn't know anything about that sport could begin coaching it.
Yeah. I think the one thing you can't teach is the relationship, between you and the kids and the athletes. And I think I'm a great believer that if you like your instructor, there's a research will show you'll do well for him. If you don't like them, you won't. And I think parents have got to be careful when they don't criticize a coach when they're going in the car on the way home and they criticize something the coach had done. When the coach, in fact, did something great, it's just the parents. If I'm coaching soccer and the parents see me throwing beanbags around, they say, well, what the hell's that got to do with soccer? If I can explain to them, actually, I'm teaching passing. I'm teaching the concept of passing. It doesn't matter whether it's a soccer ball or a beanbag. It's a passing, moving into a space, I'm teaching a concept. So when they can kick a ball, the concept and the skill come together. We're trying to teach concepts and they can't even do the skill, so they don't learn anything.
Well, then it's important also, I would assume, because I've done this in baseball, and I think more coaches need to, is, it's important to have a parent meeting to explain some of these things so you're both on the same page.
I couldn't agree more. And in my book, I mean, you can put it on your website anytime, but the Fair Play Code, and the Fair Play Code is signed by the coach, the parent, the child, and it basically says, parents say, I will never publicly question a referee's decision, and they sign that document. Because we found if they sign it, it means more than just sending a little thing home saying, oh, by the way, parents, we don't want you shouting abuse at the referee, and we just want to remind kids play for the fun of it, not for your entertainment. It's a fair play code. And we sign it, and then that becomes if you come into a hockey rink in BC now, you'll see you are a guest here. We expect the following. You will never berate a referee. And if you don't do that, you're going to be asked to leave. End of discussion.
And every league around the U.S. needs to do that. There's no doubt about it. Every park district. But 1 second, let me go back, because I think the coaches are so important. And these, again, moms and dad, volunteers. And on our show, we like to bring guys like you that are innovative, that are outside the box thinkers. And you and I, have a chance to spend 2 weeks together. That's why I love picking your brain. One of the things that I started doing before I knew you, but I really got a lot better at it after I saw how you did it, was taking the skill and placing it into the warm-up.
Yeah, either into the warm-up or the cool-down.
Oh, the cool-down. Explain that, how you do that.
Well, there's a thing called a condition game, or you put a condition on an activity to practice something that you're going to teach later on. So, for example, if you're going to play tag and you're going to do something on space awareness in soccer, and you're going to do a warm-up activity in tag, then you say to them, okay, we're going to play tag today, but when I whistle, I want you to freeze, and I want to see, you've seen this, I want to see if you're all spread out around the gym. If you're all in one half of the gym, then we're not aware of space. So the warm-up activity, the kids are starting to thinking of moving into space, and of course they do that because when somebody's chasing you, you move off. But what I got to explain is that when you're chasing one person, the other people's move into space, and then I do the thing on space awareness. So the idea is you don't call it the same thing, but what they're learning deep down, they're learning to move into a space when they see a space. We're learning things like, in fact, with little kids, sometimes I put hula hoops down on the floor, and when I blow the whistle, they have to go and stand in a hula hoop, and then I have to explain to them, if you look out those hula hoops, because children they are not aware of space. It's a learned skill, you know.
So example, let's take it to baseball. Baseball might be like a drill I do is, if we're trying to warm up the lower body, get the legs a little bit more stretched or flexed out. We'll go into fielding motions, but we'll do continuously a motion of fielding, just maybe 5, 10, 15 feet, and then come back, do it again. Or we might have partners where they toss the ball back, and forth to each other as they're jogging. So we're teaching a skill as we're warming up. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, and the other thing is that you may, for example, we stand with our legs apart about 5 yards apart. You stand with your legs apart in a beanbag, and then you try and deke out your partner and toss the beanbag through their legs, and they're not allowed to bend the knees. So when they stretch forward, it stretches the hamstrings. And also at the same time, it's developing hand-eye coordination because they've got to try and catch it. And also you're trying to deke out your partner. So it's teaching, what do you call it in baseball when you cheat? When you steal a base or you do something.
Yeah, when you steal, right.
Yeah. So it's just reaction time, hand-eye coordination and reaction time. And the idea is that as you're bending forward, you can feel it pulling down the back of the hamstring. So if you do, for example, in soccer, a lot of kids, when they kick the ball, the leg that has just kicked the football, they put it down on the ground in front, so they're off balance. So we have a little game where they stand facing each other, they lift one foot off the ground, and they try and tap the other partner's toe of the leg that's in the ground. So they're hopping around on one foot, trying to tap with the other foot. Well, that's getting them ready for when I do the push pass later on, because they're going to have to stand on one leg, kick the ball with the other, and then return it to where I started.
And that's related to a skill. It would be, and again, I'll jump to baseball just to give our audience a little something different, a different perspective. If you're going to jog, why not jog and toss a ball up in the air as you're jogging?
Well, if you're going to jog, why not toss the ball to each other?
Well, there you go.
And if you jog, then once you've caught it, you put it on the floor and you roll it, and somebody runs and picks it up as it's rolling and tosses it. They put it and roll it, and they just keep. As long as one of the things we do is teaching grids. We do a 10 by 10 grid, so we do 4 of them. So there's, if you can imagine 4 cones, 10 by 10 by 10. 2 kids in one grid, 2 kids in another grid. They play in grids, so It modifies the space. And then if you want to play 2 kids against 2 kids, for example, keep away, you want to keep a baseball away from 2 against 2, you just move the cones. So you've always got them in this predetermined space, but just by moving cones, you can have 40 by 10, 20 by 10, 20 by 20, just a way of organizing your kids. I mean,
and then on top of it, not only do you organize them, but all this saves time because you don't have to do a warm up and then also do your fundamental work because you're doing it together.
The more you can get into it, the more, as long as you write your lesson plan and decide what it is you want to get the kids to do, whether it's skill, agility, power, endurance, hand-eye coordination, balance. I would think balance is, some of these catches I've just seen in the World Series, you should be doing acrobatics.
Oh, and hitting, you need extremely good balance.
Well, but I'm just saying, if you've got kids who are going to dive and catch a ball like they're doing,
why aren't we doing that?
You've got to make sure they've got some mats in the gym or whatever, because you can't expect a kid to dive and catch a ball and land on hard grass.
And if he's never done it before, he's going to be scared to do that.
And he won't catch the ball. So if you can get those big high jump mats from the schools and use them so the kids can learn the skill and how to fall properly. One of the things in goalkeeping in soccer, it's very hard for a kid to dive full length and hit the ground without hurting himself.
Yeah, and you and I believe it was you and I, we discussed this because this is going to be another question I'm going to ask you before we almost end here. But, I'll take young kids and I'll put them on knees and then we'll dive from 2 knees, because I want to start from a lower level, teaching them how to dive, and then we'll start standing up. But I asked you this question, I can't remember, maybe a couple of years ago. Young kids, you can throw a lot more things at them than most people think you can. Is that true? In other words, they can, instead of taking it always a step by step, they can actually do more things if you allow them to do it.
Yeah, and I also think kids have skills far beyond what we thought they had. It's just that when I teach forward rolls to grade to 4-year-olds, the teacher says, "Oh, I didn't know they could do that." And I say, "Well, when did you try?" She says, "I've never tried." Well, if you don't try something, you don't find out. But it's interesting when you talk about, I used to teach swimming. If I want a kid to catch a ball, I stand him at the shallow end of the pool on the pool deck, then I toss the ball to the side and he leaps out and catches it beautifully and then crashes into the water. He develops the skill and it's fun because he gets out of the water and he does it again and he lands in the water. You don't have to practice baseball skills on a field. You can practice them in a pool. You can practice gymnastics in a pool. You can do a cartwheel into the pool.
All right. Earlier you mentioned, and you brought it up, so I'm going to bring it up. You mentioned my baseball book. It's called Youth Baseball Drills. And you were gracious enough to write a whole chapter in there. Now the chapter should have been called Mini Olympics, and I'm going to let you explain in a minute what Mini Olympics is. And we had to call it, I believe it was a different fundamental. I can't remember the exact name we called it, but we had to call it something else in the book. But it also says, Mini Olympics in it. I love Mini Olympics, so I want you to explain to the audience. And I realize it could be done in any sport, any way, but you know how we did it in baseball because you're the one who set it up. Explain that and explain why that's good and when you would use it.
I usually use Mini Olympics as a concluding activity, or I might even use it for a parent and kids night in a gym or on a field where we don't do any practice, but we do a Mini Olympics. And what it entails is, depending on how many kids you've got, you can do it with your kids and another team's kids, but you set up stations, and the stations all reflect some of the skills you use in baseball. For example, the first station, let's say you have 5 kids, 10 teams, 10 stations, 5 kids at each station. The first station, 4 kids stand at one end by a cone, 1 kid stands at the other. The first kid rolls the ball he runs, picks it up, tosses it to the second one. Basically, what happens is it's a lot of activity in a short period of time. You blow the whistle, the kids start. It may be just tossing a ball through a hoop. 1 kid retrieves it, gives it to the next kid kid throws it, retrieves it, and so on. You give them 3 or 4 minutes. At the end of 3 or 4 minutes, you blow the whistle. Somebody on each team has kept score, and you record it down on a paper. So team 1, you got 15 of those. We do bunts. If you bunt it into that hoop, you get 1 point. If you bunt it into that, so the coach or a parent would pitch it the same for everybody. Bunt it into that hoop, 1 point. Make sure the fingers are out of the way. All the teaching points we keep reminding. Do it for 3 or 4 minutes. Keep the score. Everybody rotates one position. Team 1 goes to station 2, 2 to 3, and 10 to 1. They go for 3 more minutes. Ready, off you go. Stop. Give them, write down the scores. Rotate. Finally, after 10 stations, you got all the scores. the way I score it is that at each station, the team that gets the best score gets 10 points. The team that gets the lowest score gets 1 point. I add together the points, and in 38 years of doing it, I've never had a winner yet, because I arrange it by tearing up the sheet that all 10 teams tie for first place. I don't care. They're laughing, they're giggling, they've learned some skill. You've put it under pressure, because as soon as there's a time limit, the pressure increases and the skill level drops. The smart kids will say, slow down, take your time, concentrate. The other kids will go at it like, and if you put kids and parents against each other, it's just a neat way of having a family interaction. Families that play together stay together.
Well, you also had a station where they jump rope.
You do skipping, yeah, because that's to do with agility, and it's also to do with endurance. Any exercise that lifts the body off the ground is good for the heart, because the heart rate increases. So they do 5 skips. Skipping, again, is very much a sexually stereotyped skill. Little boys tend not to skip very well. Little girls tend to skip really well. So with boys, they can either skip on their own and give the rope to somebody else, or 2 people can turn the rope and the kid skips in the middle. He gets out, the next one goes in, then they change with the end people and so on.
Well, and one of the things we see in baseball is that because of lack of foot movement and, being able to move your feet quick, then they have a hard time getting to a baseball or movement. And that's why I think it's important that young kids do this at a very young age so they get better at it. Then it's easier to teach the skills when they get older.
Well, yeah, and I think games like hopscotch, we all used to play hopscotch, but they don't play it anymore. It's basically disappeared. We've lost all our phys ed teachers in British Columbia, in Canada. So a lot of the classroom teachers are trying to teach phys ed, but we have a beautiful statement that kids are leaving grade 7 physically illiterate.
Yeah, that's terrible. And you know what? So far, we've talked about parents, we've talked about coaches, we've talked about players, young kids, and I want to end it with something you mentioned to me that kind of makes the whole circle, round. And we have it in the U.S. also, and that's park districts. We have a lot of park districts that run baseball programs, and you felt that it was important that park districts do certain things to help develop sports. And explain that a little bit.
Yeah, my 3-year-old grandson is registering right now in a soccer program. Well, I think it's absolutely criminal that 3-year-old kids should be joining soccer, because, as I said before, the parents expect you to kick a soccer ball around, and if you bring out beanbags or whatever, they feel cheated. So I think Parks and Recreation departments have a responsibility to offer sports programs where the kids for example, we have the Parks department offer Red Cross swimming programs, but the sad part is after 6 weeks, you either pass or fail a badge. And I'll show you a lot of kids who've dropped out of swimming because they failed a badge 3 or 4 times. I have no way of knowing that kid could not be a Michael Phelps 15 years from now, but he might never go to a swimming pool again because he couldn't pass a badge. Now, the reason he couldn't pass the badge may be that because his body is denser than water and he sinks. So when he floats, he sinks and he keeps failing. Well, it's got nothing to do with his skill. It's got to do with his body type. But the thing is, he will, after 4 or 5 attempts, he says, screw this, I'm going to play baseball,
Yeah, and I don't blame him.
And I think Parks Department should be offering an introduction to sport where they take kids for 10 weeks and they do running and jumping and throwing and catching and perhaps go on the ice, do a bit of figure skating, bit of hockey, go in the swimming pool, do a bit of diving, bit of synchronized swimming, underwater, a wide variety of sports for 4 or 5 years. So that when they get to 11, the kid says to his mum and dad, I really like that underwater hockey. I mean, Canada's got some most Americans have never heard of underwater hockey. But
I'd have a hard time playing hockey in general, but then if I got to do it underwater, I'm never going to survive.
Also, we don't have many men synchronized swimmers either, so I'm not suggesting some of those sports. But there are a lot of kids that, we got these Olympic facilities here. We got the luge, we've got the ski jumps, we got bobsleigh. There's a lot of activities that kids can now be exposed to that we could never be exposed to before. And I just think we've got to make sure that it's not to play soccer right now is very expensive in BC. And that's because we are paying the guys who run the organization 6-figure salaries. Well, when I played soccer, they were all volunteers. Now it's so big that we're paying head coaches. And if we're not careful, some kids will finish up not playing sport because they can't afford it.
Yeah. Oh boy. I hope it never comes to that because, we're already seeing a drop in sports and in the U.S. we're seeing definitely a decrease in participation in baseball. Now, for everybody listening out there, I've known Chris a long time and I've had the pleasure of traveling all over the world. I've listened to thousands and thousands of speakers, some of the best in the world. And I got to tell you, this is a podcast. It's a show. But when you go see Chris live, in front of people, in front of parents, in front of educators, in front of administrators, park districts, talking about these things, you just see people writing notes all the time. So if you're ever interested in having Chris come out and speak to one of your conferences, I would highly recommend it, because it will be not only fun, but it's going to be educational. And for sure, they're going to learn. So Chris, I just wanted to thank you. We spent an hour together here. It's a pleasure. Thanks for being on the show, and I know that I'm going to have you back because we need to talk even more.
I want to thank you, and I also want to tell you off at the same time that none of my children are allowed inside the house with a hat on.
Yeah, I know. It's but we're on radio here. I look great on radio.
Oh, it's a baseball thing, is it? Yeah. Anyway, thanks for having me, Pete, and thank you for all those kind words. And if anybody wants to get hold of me, you're my agent, and you get 10% of everything.
There you go. I could use that 10%. Let's make it 20. How's that?
20%.
Since you have that $1.5 million complex in your name, Yeah.
I can't go and use it though because I put so much weight on since I retired. So anyway, take care and thanks very much, Pete.
Thank you, Chris. And everyone listening to the show, remember, if you want to learn more about all our guests, get tips, see videos, and more, check out our Twitter at Inside Pitch Show. Also, our Facebook page, The Inside Pitch with Peter Caliendo. Don't forget to go to our website page at InsidePitchPodcast.com. Plus, you can email me with any question anytime. If you want to hear a specific guest, let me know. Any questions you might have about the game. Remember, coaches' education is the key to the foundation of our sport. So keep getting smarter as a coach. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. Have a great day coaching and see you on the next show.
This has been The Inside Pitch with Peter Caliendo, a Lineup Media Group production. Get access to all of our podcasts like Youth Baseball Talk, You're on the Clock NFL, and Let's Get It On with famed MMA referee Big John McCarthy and Sean Wheelock. Online at lineupmediagroup.com and on iTunes and Stitcher.